This leads me, in a way, to my next topic, which is the appearance of the UN, of Trump at the UN. Basically, Donald Trump gave a speech to the UN last week. It was UN week here in New York City. It impacted me personally, actually. Where I work is kind of close to Trump Tower, so a lot of the streets were shut off. A lot of people were really inconvenienced on their commute. It was kind of annoying. But anyway, the papers reported this, and as usual, the media really disliked Donald Trump, and they kind of reported on his gaffes. They kind of pointed out that he was laughed at and mocked by the delegation there, and the paper more or less said that he was the laughingstock of the UN. And this was supposed to be evidence of how he's bad even in the eyes of other countries, and that he's reduced the stature of the United States by his antics. Well, I have a couple things to say about that. First of all, before I get to Trump's remarks, and I will analyze them a bit, and I'll give you my take on it. They are mixed, actually. It's not fully good. It's not fully bad. I will tease out the details in a minute. But before I do, I cannot avoid saying a few words on the UN, on my personal views of the UN. I think the UN is a complete disgrace. I think it is one of the worst organizations in the world. I think it was corrupt from its very inception. I mean, this is something that when the Soviet Union, the bloodiest dictatorship on the planet, existed, the US and the Soviet Union were equal partners, founding fathers, essentially, of the UN. Today, they not only do they apologize for the Soviet Union when it was around, but you have Iran in the UN, a theocracy, a nasty theocracy that has nuclear ambitions, ruled by theocratic mullahs. Saudi Arabia, which treats its women horribly, was on the UN Human Rights Council for several years. Today, China, which is, as I was explaining, on its way to being a totalitarian state and is already an authoritarian communist state, and Russia have equal power with America on the UN Security Council. So you have a basically free country with an idea of individual rights being held equal with a communist and basically not really theocratic, but an authoritarian state like Russia. It's a complete disgrace. I think actually philosopher and author Ayn Rand, of whom I'm a huge admirer and follower of, once said of the UN, this is like a great quote by her, she called it that global citadel of hypocrisy, something to that effect. And she pointed out that it's essentially like a crime-fighting organization that has on its board mafia bosses. I mean, that's really what it is. It's basically supposed to be this wonderful force for global stability and peace, and yet it harbors all these horrible states and nasty regimes on the basis of like diversity or internationalism. That's the other thing about the UN. It's really who was enthusiastic about the UN were socialists in the early part of the 20th century. These sort of leftist, Marxist types who really wanted a global government and global governance. They didn't like the United States. They didn't like nationalism. I mean, I think nationalism has its problems, but these people were international socialists, and this was sort of supposed to be the precursor to an international socialist state. So today, there's no surprise you see a lot of leftists, modern contemporary leftists, even though they're not all really Marxist, really. They have a hodgepodge of ideas. They're still reflexively pro-UN, but why that is, we'll get into that another day. But I have to say, it's a horrible organization. If I were president, I would have kicked it out of New York a long time ago. I would have told them to go pound sand somewhere. I think the fact that they give aid to countries, these horrible dictatorial countries, they're just rotten to the core. Anyway, what did Trump say to the UN? Apart from my estimate of the UN, what is my estimate of Trump and what he said? Well, Trump said a lot of things. Let's talk about some of the good things. For one thing, he slammed Iran really hard, which is great. They are a theocracy. They are a nasty country. They're mystics, okay? They have nuclear ambitions. They hate the West. They took hostages from us in the 1970s. I believe, in fact, that the United States has been at a de facto state of war with Iran since then, when they took our hostages, and they basically helped incubate and create this radical Islamic fundamentalist movement that we're seeing today. It was really the government of Iran, the theocratic government of Iran, that gave the ideological authority and power to Al-Qaeda and other, the Muslim Brotherhood and all these other really nasty fundamentalist theocrats that we see coming out from the Middle East. So he slammed Iran. Of course, you had the traitors, the Britain, France, Germany, Russia, all these countries saying they were going to help Iran, like bypass the sanctions and stuff. This is rotten. I mean, these countries depend on the U.S. for their protection and their economic help, and here they are in true UN fashion helping this evil theocracy. He attacked Venezuela and in their leadership there. He attacked socialism. He said that the misery that's being caused in Venezuela is due to socialism. I think it's great for an American president to say that. Not enough of them do, and I think that's a fact. It is. It's because it's a socialist country. They have no individual rights. They have no economic rights. That's why they suffer there. He also attacked the idea of foreign aid generally. He said that we need to rework it and was a little bit more of a compromise position than a true principled stand that I would take. But he did say we have to stop giving money to countries that aren't our friends, which I'm a big fan of. So what were some of the negative things that Trump said? Well, of course, he defended his tariffs. He defended his tariffs against China, and he defended this idea of an America First policy and inveighed against what he calls globalism and said that he prefers patriotism, even not just in the U.S., but he wants other countries to be patriotic and not globalist. So I figured I'd spend a little bit of time talking about this idea of globalism, because I think that it's actually not a great term to use. I hate this term because you can never tell what anyone really means by it. There's two ideas in globalism. It's actually what we objectivists call a package deal. Package deal means it's two disparate concepts, two ideas that don't belong together. And they're often lumped together. Usually one of them is like a legitimate thing that's good, or at least something people can support with an argument, and the other is usually something bad. And whether you're trying to get someone to endorse it or not, it'll depend on whether you want them to like it or not. That's the side of this packet that will determine the side that you mention at any given time. So there's a lot of these package deals in our lexicon and what we say, but globalism is certainly one of those. So globalism has two components to it. On the one hand, it's used often to mean organizations like the UN or the EU, which are like global governing bodies, centralized international powers that basically invalidate local sovereignty, take over functions that local governments usually do. Typically, it's viewed as something that's not really democratic. It's kind of like a hodgepodge of different countries all speaking together in like a parliamentary system. They tend to advocate for things like open borders. They don't want to put up any trade barriers. I mean, there's a mix there, but most of that, I think, is quite negative. And on that sentiment, I'm with Trump. I don't think that it's good to have centralized authority. I don't think a global government is a good idea. I don't think it's a good idea for any reason. I can't think of anything good to say about it. I think if it goes bad, you have Big Brother. You have the totalitarian state that's taken over the world. And if you don't, you have no way. There's no competition. There's nowhere else to go if it goes bad. And any problem that you can imagine, it's solvable on the local level for the most part. And why not have like a dozen governments that respect individual rights? That's the essential. Government, the size of government actually isn't as important as what government is tasked with doing. That's another thing that's important. A lot of libertarians have this problem. They think big government is always bad. Well, it's not true. It's not big versus small. It's proper versus improper. It's rights respecting versus non-rights respecting. And that's the key distinction. So I think that the size of the government is less important than the what it does, but a single centralized government, it's more likely to go bad, and so I'm uncomfortable with that idea. But the other side of globalism, the other concept that Trump packages in with this is this idea of free trade, which is, we want to buy steel from China, we want to buy other products from Western Europe or Mexico. You have this mass supply chain, and the idea is you want to pay as little as you can for any given product, and you want countries that specialize in making a product efficiently to have that market and not worry about spreading industries across the country. Like, the idea would be, an anti-globalist, somebody like Trump, who's a protectionist, would say, well, it's unfair to the American steel industry if it's more expensive for American companies to make steel. It's not fair that someone can go to China and have their prices undercut. Well, the problem is that there's a reason why often it's cheaper to make products in other countries rather than the United States. It's cheaper to make steel in China maybe because they have fewer regulations. Maybe it's a less skill-intensive job, so people don't have to have as high a wage in order to have that job. Whatever the reason might be. And it could be a geographical thing, too. I mean, let's say you're buying corn or some crop. There are countries that have more favorable conditions for growing those things, and so they naturally specialize. They can probably grow more of the crop, and they can then sell it for less. So the idea here is that free trade is beneficial to both parties. It's a trade, they both do it voluntarily, and it's in your interest to buy it for the cheapest price available, because then you can have money, excess money, go to other things. You don't have to worry about paying higher prices for the same good. I mean, you see this principle at work every day. Think about when you you choose to go to Walmart over going to like a mom and pop store. Walmart, you go because it's cheaper, it's more convenient. There's a lot of factors there, but ultimately, they compete with the mom and pop stores, and if mom and pop stores aren't as efficient, they go out of business. And that's good because that means the mom and pop stores can now do things that they have a comparative advantage in. So this is a concept in economics called comparative advantage, where you basically want to specialize in what you do best compared to other people. So, I mean, this is a very abstract economic concept. I don't want to lose you guys with this. But I guess the only takeaway I really have here is, aside from my attack there on the UN and how nasty and horrible it is that Trump is a mix. I've said this many times, but on economics, I think he's pretty bad on this tariff issue. I think that his attacks on Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, that's all good. The problem I have with him is on this idea of globalism. I think that he's right to be against the UN and the EU. He's not right to be against free trade. Free trade benefits everybody involved. It's always to the interest of everybody involved to specialize in what they have a comparative advantage in. And, you lower the price of your product that way. You can sell more. The people in your locale can buy it cheaper. You get more business. And it's a more efficient use of resources. That's the other thing that's really important. So it's to the benefit of everybody for there to be a free trade system. And that's really all I wanted to say there on Trump and the UN.